الآن يمكنكم المشاركة في مبادرة الأيام الرقمية تحت شعار انطلق بقوة مع جوجل، والتي يتناول فيها خبراء جوجل عناوين جديدة أسبوعيا مثل السحابيات، مهارات من جوجل، أندرويد، فلتر، ذكاء الآلة، فايربيس، ديزاين ثينكينج، مقسمة إلى دورات وورشات عمل يومية بالإضافة إلى مسابقات أسبوعية. شاهد الأيام الرقمية مباشرة على اليوتيوب وشارك رأيك وأسئلتك مع خبراء جوجل، واحصل على شهادة حضور في كل محاضرة تشترك فيها. هذا وأكثر من الأحد إلى الخميس ابتداء من الساعة 9 بتوقيت دبي عبر الرابط المبين youtube.com/gdgmina.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أزول في الأول. Good evening everyone. معكم عليان عبد النور GDGTZO وجوجل ديفلوبر اكسبرت في ميدان جوجل كلاود. سأكون معكم بإذن الله خلال هذه الحصة، أين سنتعلم أشياء جديدة عن جوجل كلاود. وطبعا إذا كانت لديكم أي أسئلة يمكنكم طرحها على الشات، أو في حالة ما إذا رأيتم الفيديو بعد اللايف يمكنكم طرح الأسئلة على الكومنتس. السيشن ستكون بالإنجليزي، لكن إذا كانت لديكم أي أسئلة يمكنكم طرحها، لا مشكلة. Hello everyone, أزول في الأول. I'm Aliane Abdenour, GDGTZO Algeria. I'm Google Developer Expert in Google Cloud too, so I will be with you to learn a lot of stuff about Google Cloud and computing and all that. So in case you have any question, please feel free to ask them in the chat, or in case you see the video after this live, you can ask questions in the comments. And of course, those sessions, we will do them regularly. So you can find in the channel all the sessions, and the session that comes in future, I will be with you like twice a month, where we are going to discover a lot of stuff. So this session is based on we started like how we are going to host an application, a web app, and then we discover step by step, starting by the beginning, by the basics, and then once we get comfortable with the different tools and different technologies, then we will focus on each Google Cloud technology by one. Okay, so today we are going to continue what we did last session on Compute Engine. And then we said that Compute Engine, this is what Google offers in what we call infrastructure as a service. And just a reminder, the infrastructure, this is, we are in the cloud. So let me draw something directly here on the screen. Bring this back here. So the infrastructure, you have different layers. And then the base, this is the infrastructure. This is, you have the developers here, you have the users here. So what we do as an end user. And then you have the developer here, and then you have the sysadmin here. So the developer generally doesn't care about the infrastructure. He just wants to code and host his code. So this is why we call it platform as a service, or we will see that in future session. That's what we call now serverless. And if the user just wants to use the mouse and doesn't want to care about computing and all that stuff, that's what we call a SaaS. This is a software as a service, and this is what is used now. For example, in Salesforce or Odoo, all those ones are software as a service. So you don't sell source code, you sell a service. And then in the base, we have the infrastructure as a service. So the infrastructure as a service, this is like, give me everything, I care, and then I have the team that can do the stuff. So just give me the bare metal, install the operating system, and let me install everything and manage everything. So this is the infrastructure as a service. So the more you are in the bottom, the more expertise you need. The more you are in the top, the less expertise you need. So you need to choose wisely what you want. And generally for people who just want to work on the virtual machine, this is like they go to the infrastructure as service. So going to the infrastructure as a service, this is like installing VMware or VirtualBox or Virt Manager in your machine and working on it. So the infrastructure, you are using this virtual machine, but remotely. And that is what we call the cloud. And in the cloud, you pay for what you use. So we will discover all the model with time. So let me delete this. By the way, the tool I'm using here, that's called the Grumik. This is called Grumit MPX. It's on Ubuntu, so you can draw directly on the screen in case you want to use it to teach something or whatever. So here is the Google Cloud Console, and if you already saw our last sessions and you are here since the beginning, then you must be comfortable with it. So this is what is called Google Cloud Console, and this is what we call Google Cloud Shell, because there is some kind of people try to exchange those keywords, but we need to understand one of all. So this one is Cloud Shell. So Cloud Shell, this is this terminal where we can type something, but in remotely. So, and this one is a virtual machine. This is a temporary virtual machine that we can use not permanently, but we just use it as a middleware, something like a middleware. So you need to, when we need to work on something on Google Cloud, and then we need an intermediate machine. So let me show you something. So if I do, okay, so what if I do sudo apt install speed test? I don't know if it's already here. Anyway, so I would just run the free-h, and then you have this machine which has already 60 gigabyte of memory for free, but this is like you use it temporarily. Why? Because if I do something like that, then you have two disks. You have this one and this one. So the one stays forever, which is home, that you can store, I think, sorry, not forever. I think 2 months. If you don't use your machine for 2 months, then you get a notification to delete what you have. And then you have another partition, which is the system. So this partition, each time you run a new Cloud Shell session, it gets reset. So in case you install something here, you will not find it next time. So for example, last session, I installed speed test, and now it's not here. Why? Because I reset the virtual machine. Each time I run it, it got reset. So because we need to host an application, then we need to use something that lasts as long as we are paying. So which is compute engine. So compute engine, there is a difference between compute engine and Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell, it's temporary. Compute engine, this is where we are going to create the virtual machine, we are going to manage them and all that. And of course, this is the compute side of Google Cloud. And this is the infrastructure as a service. But infrastructure as a service, there is no compute only, because we need the storage and then we need the network. So next session, inshallah, we are going to talk deeply about VPC network. Now we are just going to go forward and then continue what we did in last session. So in last session, we explained what kind of instances Google Cloud Compute Engine gives us. So we explained what is a compute optimized E2, a C2, and all those kind of machine. And then I said that there is no one machine that fits for all. So it depends about your needs. It depends about your budget. But what I am doing now, I will create a free virtual machine. So this free virtual machine, let's call it web server, or let's add MENA web server. And then those regions, US Central and then East and then West, you have a free machine. So let me use US East one. And those free machines, you can get them here. Free tier in Google Cloud. So the free tier, as always, every session I talk about it. Why? Because this is something, this is an opportunity that we need to use. So you have two kind of free tier in Google Cloud. You have what is a demo, and then you have what is called always free. So the demo, you have 90 days. In these 90 days, you are allowed to use up to $300 of resources. Why? Because I said that in Google, in cloud in general, you pay for what you use. So in cloud, you don't go and then rent a machine and tell him, I want to rent it for $10 a day. It doesn't work like this. In cloud, you pay for what you use. So it depends on your wallet. You decide when to stop, and you decide what you pay. So you have a small enterprise, that's fine. You start with it. You have a big enterprise, that's fine. You keep doing. That's why cloud is the best solution for startups. Because as a startup, you are limited in budget and you want to control your budget. So that's better to go to the cloud because you know how much money you are going to spend. So, and then here we have this free tier, which is called always free. So why we don't call it always free? Because it depends on at what time Google decides to change. But as long as it doesn't, then it's free. So what we have, every product has its own free tier. What does it mean? I give you an example. If I go to Compute Engine, and then here, if I create this type of machine and then I host it in those regions, and then I give it this disk, then it's free. So if I decide then to create another machine, I will pay for it. But this one, it's free. And there is something that is based on, for example, cloud source repository, which is the equivalent of GitHub. Then if I am using 5 users, that's free. If I am using beyond 5 users, 6 users, or so on, then I need to pay, and so on. So this is something like you have a product, you have something free, and then if you go beyond this free, then you pay. But this free, you don't pay for it. So what we are going to use, we are going to use this machine. So we host it in one of those regions. Now, what is a region? This is the place where many data centers are in the world. So if I come here, as you can see, Google Cloud right now has up to 34 regions. Every region has what is called a zone. So generally, there are regions that have 3 zones, but there are some exceptions, they have 4 zones. And then if I come here, as you can see, there is Qatar, Doha, and then there is Dammam, المملكة العربية السعودية. So Google Cloud will be soon there. So if I come here, and then I zoom in this picture. So for those who already saw the sessions before, I keep talking about this. So if I re-enable, so we have this place. So Google will be here. So you can host now your application here. Why? To avoid latency. Because if you are in USA, and then if I'm here in Algeria, and then I want to connect to some data centers in USA, then I need to go here and then come back. And this is what we call latency. So latency, this is this round trip. And in fiber optics, we try to make the latency smaller. So every region which is in blue, it's already there. Every region that is in white, it's getting deployed. And as soon as it gets deployed, we will announce that. So now, if you are in Middle East, then it will be really easy. Why? Because if you are an enterprise, there are special solutions for enterprises where you can directly take your infrastructure and then connect it directly to Google Cloud if you have the region near to you. And we will talk about this in details in next sessions. So stay tuned. Now, let me delete this. So the regions, as long as I'm using those regions, because this is for a demo, they are free, and the latency is not something that I have to worry about it right now, because I don't need some microseconds of speed. I just need to make requests and have response. So I use the US East one because this is the one that comes near Africa. And then I use the E2, and then it tells me that if you use this machine, E2, with 2 vCPUs and 1 giga of RAM, that's free. You don't pay for it, even if you see here the price. So the pricing, you can check the pricing if you want. So let me show you something. Memory optimized. I like showing this one. 11 terabyte of RAM. And then with 11 terabyte of RAM, if you see this price, don't get surprised. Let's make it less. So I come here, and then in management, here, let me put spot. So in the past, it was like preemptible. Now it's called spot in the preference. So now if I go back here, you will see this change, but don't think you will pay for a month. Always think that you are going to pay for hours, because you just need to rent the machine for hours, not for days, because this amount of memory and CPUs, generally you don't need to use them 24 hours a day. You just need to use them like 1 hour. Imagine you use 1 hour with 11 terabyte of memory. As you can see, I even ignored this small number, relatively small number. So this is just something that you need to know. Always use preemptible if you want to use a machine that lasts less than 24 hours. So let me go back, and then let's use the free tier. So here I need to bring it back to general purpose, and here this one. And now I need to change the disk. So I come here, and then if I come to the free tier, it tells me that if you use this disk, 30 gigabyte of memory, then it's free, which is standard, not SSD. This is HDD. By the way, if you use Windows, because you need to understand that when you opt for a virtual machine, you can use Windows or Linux. You are not limited for Linux. When you are in infrastructure as a service, the good news that if you use, for example, Windows Server, then you don't have to buy the license. Everything is included. So you don't have to worry about what you are going to pay. If you want to use Red Hat or Windows Server, then you just need to choose the right operating system you want, and then you will pay for it, including this machine. So you don't have to worry about that. So let's choose Ubuntu, because I want to do something for free. And then let's choose the LTS, the latest LTS. And then here, you need to understand that extreme persistent disk, it doesn't work with any virtual machine. So you need to choose the right machine, not general purpose or anything. You need to follow, every technology needs to follow the machine type. So now I need to use the standard, and then I can use up to 30 gigabyte of disk. Now here, there is something you need to understand. You need to understand that when you host a virtual machine, Google encrypts your data. So your data is by default encrypted. And even the encryption key gets encrypted. So when you encrypt something in cryptography, so you encrypt something, and then this key you encrypt it too. I see question like CentOS. Yes, sure. You have CentOS here, but as you know, CentOS is no more supported like in the past. So it's it's not that free version of Red Hat. So if you need to use some free version of Red Hat, then you come to Rocky Linux, and Rocky Linux, it already exists in Google Cloud. The good news about this is that when you find an image on Google Cloud, that means that it's maintained, the security patch are here, so you don't have to worry. So you can use Rocky Linux, which is the CentOS of this new era. So now let me choose Ubuntu. Let me go back here. Let me go back to this Ubuntu. And then here, always think about keeping your boot disk. Why? Because if you delete your virtual machine and then this value by default, the problem is that you are going to lose your disk, everything you installed. But here, if you keep the boot disk, even if you delete your virtual machine, the disk will be kept. And this is what we call a NAS. So think about it like a NAS, a network attached storage, but in the case of Google, this is a lot like a SAN. And this is a SAN because this is they use fiber optics. And I said that they encrypt the key, or you want to bring the key, that's fine, but be careful. If you bring your own key, you need to make a backup, because if you lose it, you will lose the data. But here, there is a way to get back your data. And remember, the key is encrypted too. So this is like double security. So let's select this machine. And now I don't need to click here. I will show you what happens exactly when I click here, when I enable this checkbox. Next session, when I will talk deeply about networking. But in networking, I need to add a tag. This is like mandatory. Why? Because I need to open a firewall port, which is 888 for my test. So now let's call it MENA server. This is just a tag. And then when you write something, you just hit. So if I do MENA server, you just hit the space bar and it becomes like this. It becomes a tag. Now, I will leave everything as it is. But if I come here, I will show you something new. So why do we need Linux? Because if you learn Linux and you go to the cloud, you will feel comfortable. Even Microsoft is using Linux for their Azure platform. So if I come here, by default, we are using virt.io. Now, what is virt.io? Let me show you something. Let me run Virtual Manager. Virtual Manager, this is like VMware, but it's free. It's open source. And let me run this. So you can create, this is what we call an hypervisor. So you can create virtual machines and so on. And let me show you one parameter. And here, if I come to the network, I will find here virt.io. Now, what is virt.io? I'm sorry for it's not clear because I don't have the loop, how to zoom here. So just remember, when you use virt.io, it exists in virtualization in Linux under the technology that is called KVM. So KVM, this is kernel virtual machine, or some people call it kernel virtual module, because it's a kernel module. That means that if you install Linux, you already have KVM. So KVM, this is the hypervisor, and libvirt, this is the library, the wrapper, let's call it a wrapper, that handles the networking, the disk, and so on. So if you learn those two stuff, then you will feel really comfortable when you go to the cloud. And then, of course, to make the software easily for people, then we install what we call QEMU. So QEMU, this is the software side of the emulator of the hypervisor. KVM, this is the kernel. So think about KVM like Hyper-V. So when you install Windows Windows 10 Pro, you already have Hyper-V. But if you go to Linux, you already have KVM. But to use KVM, you need to install tools like libvirt and QEMU. And in Google Cloud, they don't use QEMU because they don't need to virtualize some old 32-byte CPUs. That's why they only use KVM and libvirt. And since we are going to use something about network, they were using virt.io, but then Google invented their own technology, which is called GVNIC. So this is Google Virtual Network Interface Controller, which is a special library invented by Google to accept larger bandwidth. So if you don't need larger bandwidth, then you can stick with the old virt.io. And then here, we will talk about those stuff in details because we will leave them for the networking. And now, let me come back here. And then here, I can choose it to create it using the command line, which is Gcloud, or I will just use it using Cloud Console. So Cloud Console, this is where I'm using the mouse, and Cloud Shell, this is where I use this stuff. So it's being created. What is this alert? Yeah, I think I left preemptible, but anyway, I will just leave it being created. So what happens now? It creates a virtual machine, it attaches a disk, and then it installs Ubuntu, and then it makes me a new virtual machine with the latest patch and the latest. By the way, this is a minimal Ubuntu. Why? Because when you work with a server, with a headless server, always remember that you need a minimal installation. Don't never install something you don't use for security reason. Because if you use something that if you install something you don't use, this can be a threat. So a hacker can exploit this. So let's wait until it creates, and let me check about the questions. So do you have any questions? No. Okay. Okay, perfect. Now I'm waiting for this. Now, before it installs, let me show you my small application that I want to host it now. So if I go to the desktop, and then let me come here. So this is a small application which is made using Tornado. Tornado, this is a web server plus a micro framework. So this is just a simple application that comes to this root. It calls this class. This class renders a web page with a variable called mina_dd. And then you have this static file handler, or you can use nginx. And then you have some variables with a template, where is located the template folder and where is located the static folder. This is just a simple hello world of Tornado, and Tornado, you can use it here. You just take Tornado web. And by the way, if you use Jupyter, Jupyter uses Tornado. So the web server behind Jupyter, this is called Tornado. It's made by FriendFeeds, who made the like button, because you need a little bit history. So that like button that you find on Facebook, it's made by a startup called FriendFeed that got bought by Facebook. So they open sourced their tool. So their tool, this is Tornado. So Tornado was used at Facebook. Okay, so let me come back here. It's been created. Why it took time? Anyway, so let me close this, and let me close Virt Manager, and then let me run this small Mina example. So this is just a small Python, and then I go to localhost, and then 888, and that's it. So what I will do now, I will try to host this application, which runs on localhost, to make it running in a web server, in a distant web server, and my web server is this virtual machine. So let me check what's going on. So let's create another instance with default value. I think it's because I checked the preemptible and I didn't remove it. That's why it takes time, because it should not take time. So let me call it web server. And then, yeah, anyway, let's call it MENA server to make it easier. And then here, let's create a micro machine. Let's go to, by the way, you can create a virtual machine that is based on containers. So for this, for people who already know operating systems that are based for containers, you have this one, Container Optimized OS. This is the one that Google created. And then you have the one that created by Red Hat, which is CoreOS. So CoreOS, this is like, this is an operating system, but optimized for containers like Docker. So let me check. Yeah, it takes time. I think I made a mistake. Anyway, let me come back here. Let me put Ubuntu and then let me put Ubuntu minimal 30 giga of memory. And by the way, now that I created 2 machines, you need to understand that I don't pay for them, both of them. Why? Because if I come to the free program here, you will see that your free tier instance limit by time, not by instance. What does it mean? Is that if you use 1 instance, you will not pay for it for 24 hours, 7 days, 4 weeks, 30 days. But if you create 2 machines, then if you use them 50 days in a month, you don't pay for them. So that means that if you create 4 machines, then you use them for 1 week for free. 4 machines, 8 machines, and you do the math. So it's based on hours and not by the utilization. Yeah, I think that I made a mistake here. So it gets, it entered in a loop. So let me correct this. And then here in the network, I need to put the tag. So MENA server demo, something like this. And then here, I need to put the default values, and then I create the machine. And here I should not have, let me destroy this machine. It doesn't, yeah, see, the one it entered in the loop, and I even got an error here. So anyway, see, it didn't take that time. So if I come here, everything is fine. It didn't take like 10 seconds. Now, because I asked for an IP address, this IP address, this is for free too. Because if I come to free tier, Compute Engine free tier does not charge for an external IP address. So you can SSH your machine. Now, I said SSH. Let me show you now the most important thing, because I said like a professional, and here I'm talking like a professional in 2010, how we were hosting application. So we were hosting it in a web server, and then we access using SSH. But now it's not the case. People now use the serverless, so they don't access using SSH. They use other ways. We will see that in future sessions. So let me now access to SSH. The first way, which is the direct way, is directly click here. But, and why do I do this? Because if I come to VPC network and check VPC, VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. This is like VPN. VPN, this is for Virtual Private Network, but VPC, this is Virtual Private Cloud. So you own everything you create. So if I come to here to the default that we can expand in details next time, you will see that if I come and edit it, by default, this is auto mode. So we will learn that more and more. And then if I come to the firewall, I will see that there are some rules that got applied by default. And one of them is 22. So 22, this is SSH. So it allows ingress, and ingress, that means I can access to this. This is entering traffic, and egress, this is outbound traffic. What is entering to your website or your server, that's called ingress. What comes from your server, that's called egress. So if I come here, I am inside now this machine and it's empty. So now I will try to access, but using other tools, because generally I don't come to the cloud console and then click here. So the other ways, I can use another client. So people from Windows, they know what is PuTTY. But here it tells me you have other ways. And using PuTTY like in the old way, that's an insecure. How we are using PuTTY, we were using something like this. Let me stop the web server. SSH, and then we use user arrobas IP. And that's it. And then if you change it, the port, then we use -p. This is the old way. So let me try it now directly here. Since I already have an IP address, let me copy the IP address, of course, the external, not the internal. And now let me do SSH, and then the user, which is by default my email, and then let's access to it, and then it tells me, I found it. Do you want to continue? I say yes, and then let's choose the default values, and then it failed. Why? Let me check now what's going on. If I come here, let me see what's inside this SSHD config, which is the default configuration of the SSHD. And then if I come here, I will find everything by default except the password authentication. So by default, you cannot use the old password authentication. So by default, you need to upload your SSH key, the public key, because the old way, you just access, it asks you for credentials, you give it a credentials, and this way is deprecated. This is insecure. And the second one, even Google Cloud doesn't encourage this. This is using SSH Cajun. You type SSH Cajun or in PuTTY, you already have this command. And then it asks you to create a private and public key. I validate, I put everything by default. And then what I do, sorry, not here. I made a mistake. Sorry for that. So I come to SSH Cajun, and then it asks me to place the public key. And then it tells me that it already exists because I already host other websites, and then I use my public key with GitHub and all the other service. So let me cancel this. So what I do, I just access to this folder. So I am in home. So inside home, you access to this hidden folder, and then this, let me do cat ID RSA and then -path. So you have two keys. This is the private key and this is the public key. So let me access to this. I will copy all that. This is a public key. Yeah? This is not a private key. So that's fine. You can copy it to the host. And then I come to this virtual machine. And then I get inside the virtual machine and I edit it. So let me explain you when you edit a virtual machine, what happens. You cannot edit a virtual machine that is running in the virtual machine itself. It's RAM, it's CPU, because it's running. So you need to shut it down. But if you want to edit the metadata, because the metadata is a server somewhere, it gives some information about this virtual machine. Then you can edit it even if the machine is running. And from the metadata that I need, I come here to SSH, and then I add a new key. So I click here and I passed the one I just created, and then I save. Those ones are the one that Compute Engine creates by default. That's why when I click, it's just enter there, because it's internal. Now I need to access using my machine to the virtual machine using SSH. So what I did, I copied the public key, and now it's here, and it's here, this one. But remember, this is by virtual machine. You can create an SSH key and upload it to a project. So the project, you don't have to copy and paste the key in different machines. But I will not do that, because even what I just did here, it's deprecated. Now what I do, I just need to retype this command. And since it's already, my public key, it's already on the server, if I validate, let me do that, yes. And public key, it didn't replicate. Sorry, this is not the user I'm going to use. This is the default user, which is the one I'm using now, not the user that I'm using in Google Cloud. So what happened? Google Cloud created a new user, this one, because it doesn't know the other user. Now I'm inside. So if I do that, if I do cd and then I check the users, this is the default user that Google Cloud creates when I created Compute Engine. And this one, this is the one I access now. So there is something you need to understand. If I do sudo nano etc shadow, this is where passwords are stored. If I come here, you need to understand that both users don't have passwords. So be careful, because this user that I just created, it will ask me a password that I don't have it. So I need to create a password for this user, but this user, even if it asks me for a password, it already accepted by default, because this is the user that Ubuntu installed it the first time. So if I do something like this, if I try to switch to the other user, I see, because it doesn't know which one. But if I go back here and then I do something like, who am I? It tells me you are the user that I tried to switch to. Now, if I do sudo anything, ls, for example, it will work directly. Why? Because I'm super admin by default. But if I SSH'd using another user, I need to create a password. And this way, it's deprecated. Why? Because now, if you need to use SSH from distance, you need Gcloud command. So Gcloud, it's Google Cloud SDK. This is like, you can use Google Cloud directly here from here, which is called using the console, or using the APIs, or using the Google Cloud SDK. So you just need to Google it here and then do Cloud SDK, and then you can download it for your operating system, Windows, Linux, Mac, and all that. So if I come here and then I type, you have by categories. So if I do Gcloud and then compute, this is for Compute Engine. If I want to do something like for Google Cloud Run, then I type Gcloud Run. So it's by categories. Now I just need to tell him I want to get using Compute Engine, and then I need you to give me what I have as instances. And then I need you to list them. And then what I have, it gives me all the instances I just created. So here is the one I created. But before doing this, we need to tell Gcloud that I'm inside my project, because anyone can use Gcloud. So what I need to type Gcloud config list. So the first time that you use Gcloud, it asks you for authentication by default. And then once you authenticate, you need, because a user can have many projects, so you need to do this one. So in case you don't see a project here, that means you need to configure Gcloud to know the project you use. So to do that, you just need to do Gcloud, and then you do projects list, or you just come to the interface and click on the project, and then you copy the ID, not the name. You need the copy because this is the one which is unique. Now I come to Gcloud, and then I do config, and then I tell him I want to set a project. And as you can see, you can autocomplete. And then which project I need to set by default this project. So I copy this, and once I copy it, I paste it. Now it's updated. So of course I already updated it here. Now since I am there, I just need to do now Gcloud compute and then instances list. So when you do that, you are going to list all the instances you have. So if I unzoom here, no problem. So you have the internal IP and you have the external IP, which is the same interface as this one. So if I come here, I will see the same one in Compute Engine in the default page. So let me come to VM instance instead of going back again and again. And as you can see, I have the name, I have the IP, the external IP and the internal IP. Now I want to SSH to this. So I just need to do Gcloud compute and then SSH, and then I need to give it the name, which is MENA server. So I don't need to know which IP address I'm using, because Gcloud, it's already configured with my credentials. So that means that it already knows what does it mean, MENA server, which is an internal DNS that tells it this is what you use. And then I need to use the zone, because by default, if you don't put the zone, it may ask you, or if it already knows, then as you can see, it will use this, which is not what I configured. So then I need to give it the right zone, because it's not in central. Now, if I don't know the zones, I just need to do Gcloud and then compute and then zones and then list. I will list all the zones I need. And as you can see, you pick the zone that you need, and then I use the US East one. So I just East 1B. This is by default. And as you can see, this is the region, and this letter is the zone. So now, if I, I come here, and then I tell him I want the zone I created, and that's it. Yeah, it's not here. Oh, I made a mistake. So the zone, yeah, central. Yeah, sorry. I made this mistake because when I recreated it, I didn't change it. So it was right when it picked the default one. So this one. And now I just access to my virtual machine, but not using the user I used earlier. So earlier I used this user, which is the same in my machine, because this is the one I uploaded, it's K. But now I'm using the right user. So here I can use, I generate the password for the other user. So let's put A and A. Now it has a password. So if I access to this user. Now I'm inside this user. Now let's exit and let's access to the old using the old way. Now let me upload my application. For this, I can use several tools. The old one, I think you know it, that's called Filezilla. But since now you have GFTP or directly using the normal folder browser. So I come to other location, and then here in the bottom, you will find something here. So what you need, you just need to pick this IP address and then type SFTP. Why? Because SFTP, it uses SSH. So you have the FTPS, which is TLS over FTP, and you have SFTP, which is using the same port as SSH. So if I do this and then access, now I can copy and paste. So now I'm inside the folder of this virtual machine. So I can create a new folder and call it proof, something like this, proof MENA. Now, if I come back here and then do ls, yeah, I need to switch the user because this is one I'm using now, password. Now, if I do ls and I have this folder, so I can now copy and paste the project. So I come here, I copy, and then I come back here and I paste it. So proof MENA, I double click, and then I just do a copy paste. Or you can use Filezilla or WinSCP, which is a perfect one on Windows. I missed that on Linux. So now, if I come here in the console, so if I do cd proof MENA, and then I found the MENA digital date, so you can even see that it's the same structure. So I need now to do Python and then MENA and then MENA example. Now it tells me it doesn't have this, so I need to install pip, this one to install like we did in the same in the last session. And of course, when you install this, don't forget to do pip freeze. This is to generate the dependencies you use in virtual environment. But the last thing you need to understand is that you come to VPC network, to the firewall, because here in our project, if I come to nano and then what is the name, MENA example, you will see that the port we are using is 888, this one, which is not the default, because next session we will see what happens exactly when we check the HTTP server and HTTPS server. So now I need to create a new rule, and then here allow TCP 888. We will see that in details. Now I will leave everything and I say ingress. I need to access to the machine, not egress. And then now specify tag, and then I put the machine, let's bring back the tag, how we put the tag for this virtual machine, for the network inside. Because what happens now, when we create this rule, it will be applied for all the machines that have this tag. So it has this tag. Where is the tag? This is it, MENA server demo. So I will copy it, and then I come to the firewall, and then I paste it here, and then hit space, and I want to access from everywhere, 0/0/0/0. This is accessing from everywhere. And then which port you want to enable. Here I tell him I want to enable the 8888. Now I create. So waiting for this to be created, let me install Tornado, sudo apt install Python 3 pip. Now it will not take time because I'm using Google connection. I'm not using my connection. So it's like 100 of megabyte by seconds. So waiting for this. Yeah, so pip freeze for what? Pip freeze, this is to generate the dependencies you used in a Python project. And of course, you need to create a virtual environment. It's like a self-contained project, and then install everything using pip, and then you do pip freeze. It gives you what you already installed in this current project. So here, I think that now everything is installed. Pip install Tornado. So it should work now. Everything got installed. Now, if I do nano, sorry, this is not nano. I want to use Python 3, and now it runs. So what I need to do, I just need to pick the IP address of this virtual machine and add 888, and it should work. So sorry, I came to App Engine. Old memories. Okay, let me come here, and then let's pass this IP address 2 points, and then it works. And as you can see, of course, you are not going to use this port because you are going to use your application behind the reverse proxy like Nginx and all that. This is like, you can find it anywhere on the web, but my objective is to show you how to use what you will find on web on Google Cloud. So you can use this strategy using Tornado or using Node.js. But what is important for me is how you are going to access to this virtual machine. And of course, forget the SSH way, because the OS login is the way that uses Compute Engine. The OS login, you need to configure it using the meta server, the metadata server, and then enable OS login, or using the Gcloud command. Okay, so do you have any questions? And of course, you will buy a domain name and then change this IP address to your domain name. So do you have any questions before we go next? So let me come back here. Yeah, Quick Labs. Yeah, Quick Labs, you can have free access to Quick Labs in next sessions. Just stay tuned, and then we will do some session where we are going to share free Quick Labs access. And then, okay. So do you have any questions? How can I? Yeah, shukran Omar Ibrahim. How can I secure my public IP? There is no way. It's called public IP. So to secure it, there are strategies how to use, how to let people access to your IP. This is securing, closing the port you don't use, securing your application, create what we call a web application firewall, or what is called the WAF, creating some strategy where you are going to use some servers that are not accessible to the world, but other servers are accessible to the world, and then you create some strategy where only some people access. For example, database server is not allowed to be accessible from outside, so only inside. So there are many strategies because it's called public IP. So by design, everyone must access to your website. Now, if you want to protect your IP from the public, then you use a VPN. So other questions? Yeah, there is a strategy that is used in Google Cloud. So let me show you this. So if I come to App Engine and then come to the security, okay, cron job, instances, service, or let's go directly to Cloud IAM. And let me show you a product that is good, that is used by Google, that is called App Armor. Not App Armor, sorry. Let me come here and service account. Yeah, Cloud IAP. IAP, this is a way to access to your application, but with authentication. This is like with a reinforced authentication. As you can see, I already used that and then I deleted the application. That's why I get an error. So this is, you can Google about this because we will do a session about Cloud IAP when we will get to the serverless to show you how we can secure an application. And when people access to this application, even if it's public, only allowed people using Gmail account, for example, are allowed to access to this application, or using a digital fingerprint. This is like an advanced way. Even Google use that. You can find on YouTube some videos about people who already use Cloud IAP. Because VPN is not always the good solution, because VPN, it reduces your connection, and people, when they travel in airplanes, they need good connection. So you can use Cloud IAP. Okay, so do you have other questions? Just forgot to talk about something just before we finish. In Compute Engine, you have what is called instance template. So instance template, why we need that? This is like to create some some templates and then scale this template. Because when people access to your website, there is, for example, you have 1,000 people accessing your website, and that's fine. But what if you have 1 million people? Then here you need to scale. And to scale, you just need to create as many virtual machines as you limit them, for example, or as people ask to. So when you have 1 million, for example, you deploy 100 virtual machines. And for this, instead of creating them manually, what you do, you create an instance template exactly like you do, like you create a normal virtual machine, and then you create an instance group. So you come and then you create an instance group here, and in instance group, you create what is called the managed group. So in managed group, what happens that the more people are asking for resources, the more you deploy using, for example, CPU, some rules. For example, you tell them if you have 70% of the CPU, create another instance. Or if you have like many people using the bandwidth, then create another instance, and so on. So for this, you just need to create an instance template. So instead of creating a virtual machine, you create an instance template, because from the virtual machine itself, you can create it from from a template. So a template is always something that you can create for future. So for example, you can create a template and name it free tier, and then every time you create it from this template. Okay, so if you have any questions. Yeah, why I didn't talk about this, because now, instead of doing it this way, now we use Kubernetes. So Kubernetes, this is not only deploying new virtual machines, but deploying new containers, and containers are inside virtual machines. So the instance get deployed, and then if you need more containers, then it verifies if they fit inside one machine. If they don't fit inside one machine, then you get a second machine. And all this is using Compute Engine. So Kubernetes engine is already using Compute Engine, because Compute Engine, remember, that's the base. Last, and then we will finish. Let me come here to the VPC network. Let me first delete this virtual machine. Of course, every time you do something for demonstration, don't forget to delete your resource after you finish. How you get free tier? That's it. You just need to register to Google Cloud. You go to Google Cloud and then you will have a free tier. You register using your Gmail. It asks you name and so on. And then, by the way, you will need the credit card, not because they need money, because to verify that you are a human, not a robot. This is the new way how a lot of websites verify for a human using a credit card, but it will not be touched in the 90 days. So it's like free 3 months. So the credit card, this is just to verify that you are a real human. Because imagine if someone create a bot that creates a lot of virtual machines, it will be a mess. So if I come to now to VPC network, and then I will delete it. So if I come here, and then I come to the default, because every time you create a project, there is a default VPC that gets created. Let me delete it. And now let me go back to virtual machine, compute engine, and let me create a virtual machine. Let me try at least to create a virtual machine. And now if I came to create an instance, I will leave everything as it is, or I will recreate the one that you saw me creating, which is the micro. And then here, let me come to the network. Here, it's still deleting. As soon as it finishes, you will see something strange, which is why we need to understand the regions, because a virtual machine belongs to a zone which belongs to a region, and the region is using a global network. So if you delete the network, you will not be able to create a virtual machine. So the base of Google Cloud is the VPC. So you need, that's why every time you create a project in Google Cloud, by default, you get allowed a virtual a default VPC. So let me refresh now. And let me go and create a virtual machine. So now let's come here. Let's create this free one. And let's come here and let's create virtual machine. See? I cannot create a virtual machine. Why? Because if I come to the network, it doesn't find where I'm going to put this machine. So a network interface, it needs a network itself to be bound to your virtual machine. That means that even if you don't need a public IP, then never delete the VPC. So the VPC, this is the basic, then comes to the compute engine, and then all the other services are based on that. Okay, so if you don't have questions, لديكم أسئلة. And of course, stay tuned, because there will be other sessions where I go deeper and deeper for each product. So the next session will be about the network. Yeah, there is a cost in VPC, but there is a cost for egress traffic. You need to understand that in cloud, you don't pay for requests coming to your server. You pay for requests coming outside your server. But in the free tier, you already have 1 giga of network egress. That means that if you have images and then you have CSS or JavaScript, for example, you have jQuery, then you don't have to host jQuery in your server. Always use CDNs. So try to free your servers from static files, so you don't have to pay the egress. Because when you serve a website, you are serving images and sound and videos. So all that, when it's egress, the first gigabyte, that's free. When you go beyond 1 giga, then you pay. And of course, you pay for something like 0 dot something. So paying in cloud, that's not. So let me show you. So cloud, Google calculate, to see that at the end, you don't really pay that much, because always remember that when you host something in cloud, you are also making money. So that percentage you paid for the service provider. So if I come to compute engine, let me zoom. So this website, you can directly Google Cloud calculator in Google, and then you will have all the product, as you can see, all the product. So if we choose egress, and then I choose, for example, here, and this one, and you can calculate exactly how much it will cost. So it seems that I have, so if I come to compute engine, and then number of instance, for example, 1 instance, you can fill everything, and then choose all the option. So let me come back to this CPU network egress, and then yeah, it's too white. Okay, so for example, let's use, for example, 100 gigabyte, which is a lot for a simple website, and then you do add to estimate, and then you get an estimation. Let me unzoom. As you can see, this is $11, but if you are gaining more, that means that $11, that's nothing. This is how you need to understand stuff, because there is nothing which is completely free. Because you are, when you go to the cloud, you are not paying for these resources. Remember that. You are also paying for the knowledge, because there are software engineers, there are network engineers, there are security engineers. And then you need to understand that when you are in the cloud, the difference between being in cloud and being on-premise, this is what you host in your data center, is that you don't pay for electricity, and then you don't have to pay for a failing disk. Imagine that you are using a disk and then it crashed. So you need to throw it and buy a new disk. In cloud, you don't have to pay for all this. You just pay for the use. And that's why we advise it for startups. Okay, so if you don't have questions, thank you very much. شكرا جزيلا لكم. تنمير ثنون, and see you in next session, inshallah.